She told no one for 60 years, not her children, not her grandchildren, because who would believe that black women, American black women, were prisoners of war in Nazi Germany? Their names were erased, their stories buried, their suffering denied, until now. December 1944, the world is burning. Hitler's Third Reich is collapsing, but still fights with desperate, savage fury. American forces push through Belgium in what will become known as the Battle of the Bulge, the bloodiest battle American troops will face in the entire European theater. 600,000 Americans, 500,000 Germans, frozen forests, artillery fire that shakes the earth. And in the chaos, something unprecedented is happening. Black women are in the war zone, not just stateside, not just in safe rear areas, but here in the beating heart of the most brutal European combat. They are Army nurses, members of the Women's Army Corps, telephone operators, Red Cross workers, and they are about to face something the American military never prepared them for, something history would try desperately to forget. But here's what they don't teach you in history class. Here's what gets left out of every World War II documentary you've ever watched. When Nazi forces broke through Allied lines in that frozen December, when American positions were overrun and thousands of soldiers were captured, black women POWs were taken too. And what happened to them in those camps, what they endured, what they survived, is a story that will break your heart and restore your faith in the human spirit all at once. Let me tell you about Lieutenant Eula Aubrey, 26 years old, born in Muskogee, Oklahoma. Graduated top of her nursing class despite being told by 3 different nursing schools that they didn't accept colored students. She joined the Army Nurse Corps in 1943 because she believed, truly believed, that if black Americans served with honor, if they proved their courage, things back home would have to change. And there was Private First Class Johnny Mae Welton, 22, from Birmingham, Alabama, a WAC assigned to communications. Her daddy worked in the steel mills, her mama cleaned white folks' houses. Johnny Mae could type 70 words per minute and spoke fluent French. She volunteered for overseas duty when other women were begging to stay stateside. Then there was Delphine Carter, Red Cross worker, 24 years old, Philadelphia. Radiant smile that could light up a room, even a room in a war zone. She served coffee and donuts to soldiers in field hospitals. She wrote letters home for boys who'd lost their hands. She sang gospel songs to dying men who called for their mothers. And she never, not once, hesitated when they asked for volunteers to move closer to the front lines. These weren't just names. These were daughters, sisters, dreamers. They came from segregated America, where they couldn't drink from the same water fountains as white people, where they sat in the back of buses, where they were called names I won't repeat here, and yet they put on American uniforms. They swore an oath. They served a country that didn't fully see them as human, but they believed in something bigger. They believed in freedom. They believed in dignity. They believed that their service mattered, and they were about to pay a price for that belief that no one should ever have to pay. December 16th, 1944. The first day of the Battle of the Bulge. It's 4:30 in the morning, and the world explodes. German artillery pounds American positions. With a fury no one expected, Hitler has thrown everything he has left into one final, desperate offensive. 200,000 German troops smash through the Ardennes forest. American lines buckle. Communications go dead. Units are cut off. Chaos reigns. Lieutenant Aubrey is in a field hospital just 12 miles behind what everyone thought was a secure front line. She's tending to wounded soldiers, boys with missing limbs, burned faces, shell shock. Then she hears it, the unmistakable rumble of German tanks getting closer. Someone shouts that German paratroopers are landing behind American lines. The hospital commander, a white colonel from Virginia, makes a decision: begin evacuation, priority to medical personnel. But here's where it gets ugly. Here's where the segregation that existed in every part of American society, even in the military, even in a war zone, becomes a matter of life and death. The white nurses are loaded into the first convoy of trucks, then the white support staff. The black nurses, Lieutenant Aubrey among them, are told to wait for the second convoy standard procedure. The army was segregated. Even in evacuation, there was a racial hierarchy. The second convoy never comes. By 10 a.m., German forces overrun the field hospital. Lieutenant Aubrey and 4 other Black Army nurses are standing in the freezing cold with their hands in the air as SS troops point machine guns at their chests. One of the German soldiers, a young officer who speaks English, looks at them with genuine confusion. He's never seen Black women in American military uniforms. For a moment, no one knows what to do with them. That moment of confusion might have saved their lives. Because Nazi racial ideology had no clear category for Black women POWs, they weren't quite soldiers in German eyes, but they wore American uniforms. They were Black, which meant subhuman in Nazi doctrine, but they were women, which complicated the brutal calculus of war. Meanwhile, 15 miles away, Private Johnny May Welton and 3 other Black WWIIs are in a communications truck when a German patrol surrounds them. They're trying desperately to destroy classified documents, to smash radio equipment, when the truck doors ripped open. Johnny May looks into the face of a Wehrmacht soldier, and in that instant, her life changes forever. Delphine Carter's capture is even more terrifying. She's in a makeshift Red Cross station when German commandos storm in. They're looking for Allied officers, intelligence, anything valuable. What they find is a young Black woman with red crosses on her armband, surrounded by wounded American soldiers. One German soldier raises his rifle, Delphine closes her eyes, and then an officer barks an order in German, and she's dragged outside instead. In total, over those first 3 days of the Battle of the Bulge, at least 11 Black women in American service were captured by German forces. The exact number remains unclear because the records were either lost, destroyed, or deliberately buried. But those women, those Black women POWs, were about to enter a nightmare that would test everything they thought they knew about survival. The camp is called Stalag 9A, near the German town of Ziegenhain. It's a sprawling complex of wooden barracks surrounded by double rows of barbed wire, guard towers every 100 yards, searchlights that turn a night into day. 20,000 prisoners are crammed into a space designed for 5,000. British, French, Russian, American, and now for the first time, Black American women. When Lieutenant Aubrey and the other Black nurses arrive, the male American POWs stare in disbelief. No one can process what they're seeing Black women. Here, in a Nazi POW camp, the ranking American officer, a white colonel from Texas, actually argues with the German commandant, insisting there must be some mistake. The Germans don't know what to do either. Nazi doctrine says prisoners of war must be treated according to Geneva Convention rules, but Black people aren't fully human in their twisted ideology, and women POWs are almost unheard of. So they make a decision. The Black women POWs are separated from everyone else. They're put in a small barracks at the edge of the camp, guarded more heavily than other sections. They're given the same starvation rations as other prisoners, watery soup and moldy bread, but they're watched constantly. Some guards are curious, some are hostile, some look at them with a mixture of confusion and disgust. The cold is unbearable. January 1945 is one of the coldest winters on record in Europe. The barracks have no heat. The women sleep 3 to a bunk, trying to share body warmth. Lieutenant Aubrey's feet develop frostbite. Johnny May Welton's fingers go numb for days at a time. They wrap themselves in whatever they can find: newspaper, burlap sacks, strips of cloth torn from their own uniforms. But the physical suffering is only part of it. There's a psychological torture that comes with being Black women in a Nazi POW camp. They're displayed like curiosities. German officers bring visiting officials to stare at them through the barracks windows. Some guards make monkey noises, others spit. The Nazi propaganda machine doesn't quite know what to do with them, because acknowledging Black women in American military service contradicts everything they've told the German people about racial hierarchies. And then there's the fear, the constant, gnawing fear of what might happen when the guards' curiosity turns to violence. Because make no mistake, sexual violence was a weapon of war, and these Black female POWs were uniquely vulnerable. They slept in shifts, always with at least 2 women awake, watching the door. They developed signals, ways to warn each other if a guard was coming. They carried makeshift weapons, a piece of broken glass, a sharpened spoon, anything. Lieutenant Aubrey later recalled one night when a drunken SS guard entered their barracks. He stood in the doorway, swaying, his intentions clear. The women gathered together in the corner. No weapons, no way to fight back. Just their voices, and they began to sing. A gospel hymn. His eye is on the sparrow, their voices rising in the frozen darkness, beautiful and defiant. The guard stood there for what felt like an eternity. Then he turned and left. They sang through the night, too terrified to stop, their voices the only shield they had. The cruelty wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was bureaucratic. When Red Cross packages arrived for American POWs, packages with food and medicine and warm clothes, the black women POWs received nothing. The German administrators claimed there was paperwork confusion about their status. Were they prisoners of war? Were they civilians? The questions were deliberate delays, ways to deny them the basic protections other POWs received. But perhaps the deepest wound was the treatment from some of their fellow American prisoners. Even here, even in a Nazi POW camp, some white American soldiers wanted nothing to do with black women. POWs, they maintained the segregation they'd known back home. They didn't share rations. They didn't offer help. In the face of Nazi hatred, some Americans chose to carry their own hatred with them, yet not all. There were white American POWs who shared their Red Cross packages, British soldiers who traded cigarettes for extra blankets for the women, even a few German guards who, in quiet moments, showed flickers of human decency. Humanity persisted even in the darkest places, but it was never guaranteed, never assumed. But here's what the Nazis didn't expect. Here's what history almost lost. These black women POWs didn't just survive. They resisted, in ways small and large, in ways that could get them killed. They fought back. Lieutenant Aubrey was still a nurse, even without supplies. She began treating fellow prisoners with whatever she could scavenge. Moss from the barracks walls for wound dressing, heated snow water for sanitation. She saved at least a dozen men from infections that would have killed them. The Germans forbade her from providing medical care. She did it anyway in the shadows at night, risking solitary confinement or worse. Johnny Mae Welton, with her communications training, became something else entirely. She began gathering intelligence, listening to guards' conversations, noting troop movements she could see from the barracks window, memorizing schedules and weaknesses in camp security. She couldn't do anything with the information, not trapped behind barbed wire, but she collected it anyway, because she believed, had to believe, that someday she'd get out. Someday she'd tell someone. Someday it would matter. And Delphinus Carter, the Red Cross worker with the radiant smile, became the camp's secret historian. She had managed to hide a small pencil and scraps of paper during her capture. And in the margins of German newspapers, in the blank spaces of propaganda flyers, she began to write. She documented everything. Names of black women POWs, dates, incidents of abuse, acts of kindness. She was creating a record, a testament, proof that they had been here, that they had existed, that their suffering was real. But the most powerful resistance was simply their refusal to break. The Germans wanted them to despair, to collapse, to confirm Nazi beliefs about racial inferiority. Instead, these black female POWs held their heads high. They maintained military discipline. They saluted officers, even in captivity. They kept their corner of the barracks as clean as possible. They looked their captors in the eye. Every morning they formed up and counted off, just like they'd been trained. Every night before sleeping, they recited the Pledge of Allegiance in whispers. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The irony wasn't lost on them, pledging allegiance to a nation that denied them liberty and justice. But they did it anyway, because the uniform still meant something, because the oath still mattered. And then, in February 1945, something extraordinary happened. A new group of prisoners arrived at Stalag 9A. They were members of the Tuskegee Airmen, black fighter pilots who'd been shot down over Germany. When these black male POWs saw black women in the camp, when they understood what these women had endured, something shifted. The Tuskegee Airmen organized. They demanded that the black women POWs receive equal treatment, the same Red Cross packages, the same protection. They threatened a camp-wide strike of American prisoners if conditions didn't improve. The German commandant, practical and wary, made concessions. Not out of moral conviction, but because managing 20,000 POWs required a fragile cooperation. The black women POWs began receiving Red Cross packages. The harassment from guards decreased. It wasn't justice, it wasn't equality, but it was survival. And in a Nazi POW camp in the winter of 1945, survival was everything. April 1945. The Third Reich is collapsing. Soviet forces close from the east. American and British forces from the west. Germany is being crushed in a vice. At Stalag 9A, the guards are nervous. Some desert. Others get drunk. Rumors spread among the prisoners. Liberation is coming. The question is whether they'll live long enough to see it. On April 2nd, the German commandant receives orders. Evacuate the camp. March the prisoners deeper into Germany, away from advancing Allied forces. It's a death sentence disguised as an order. Thousands of starving, sick prisoners forced to march hundreds of miles. Many won't survive. The black women POWs know this. They've seen death marches before. Columns of skeletal prisoners shuffling down roads, dropping dead in ditches. But Lieutenant Aubrey makes a decision. She's too sick to march. Frostbite has turned to infection. She can barely walk. And she tells the other black female POWs to go without her. To take their chances on the march, they refuse. Every single one. If one stays, they all stay. It's not even a discussion. It's understood. They've survived this long together. They'll face whatever comes next together. As the main body of prisoners is marched out of the camp, about 300 prisoners too sick to travel are left behind with a skeleton crew of elderly German guards. The black women POWs are among them. They wait in the abandoned barracks, not knowing if the retreating Germans will execute them, if they'll starve before liberation arrives, if Allied bombs will hit the camp by mistake. 3 days pass. The sound of artillery grows louder, closer. On April 6, 1945, the firing stops. There's an eerie silence. Then in the distance, a rumbling tanks. But whose tanks? German or American? The prisoners hold their breath. The first tank through the camp gates has a white star painted on its side, American. The 6th Armored Division. Lieutenant Aubrey, watching from the barracks window, collapses to her knees. Not from weakness, though she's weak, but from the sheer, overwhelming realization that they've made it. They've survived. Against every odd, against every cruelty, they're alive. But liberation isn't a Hollywood ending. It's messy, chaotic. American soldiers entering the camp are shocked by the skeletal prisoners. They call for medics, for supplies, for emergency rations. And when they find the black women POWs in their separate barracks, when they understand what these women are, who they are, there's confusion, disbelief. Some of the liberating soldiers are black troops themselves, and they stand in that barracks doorway with tears streaming down their faces. One soldier, a young black private from Detroit, asks Lieutenant Aubrey how long they've been prisoners. 4 months, she tells him. 4 months. He's quiet for a long moment. Then he says, "Ma'am, we didn't even know. We didn't know you were here. You'd think this is where the story ends, liberation. Return home, medals, recognition, parades. But you'd be wrong, because what happened to these black women POWs after liberation might be the cruelest part of the entire story. They were evacuated to Allied medical facilities in France. They received treatment for malnutrition, frostbite, infections, but they also received something else: orders. Direct orders not to speak publicly about their experience. The Army's official position was that black women had not been in combat zones, had not been captured, had not been POWs. To admit otherwise would complicate things. It would raise questions about segregation policies. It would validate black soldiers' demands for equal treatment. So the records were classified. The reports were buried. The women were debriefed and then told in no uncertain terms that their stories were matters of national security. They were sent home quietly. No press conferences, no recognition, no Purple Hearts or POW medals. Just a discharge and a handshake and an implicit threat. Silence was patriotic. Speaking out was not. Lieutenant Eula Aubrey returned to Oklahoma and tried to resume her nursing career. But she had nightmares, panic attacks. What we'd now call PTSD, but in 1945, Black women with trauma weren't offered counseling or support. She moved from job to job, unable to hold steady work. She never married, never had children. Her family noticed she'd wake up screaming some nights, but she never explained why. They didn't know she'd been sworn to secrecy. Johnny Mae Welton went back to Birmingham and found that nothing had changed. She'd survived Nazi Germany, but she still couldn't vote in Alabama, still couldn't sit at a lunch counter with white people, still had to enter movie theaters through the back door. She'd worn an American uniform, taken an oath, been a prisoner of war, and her country still treated her as less than human. Delphine Carter fared a bit better. She kept her hidden writings, her secret history of the camp. She sealed them in an envelope and put them in a safe deposit box with instructions that they shouldn't be opened until after her death. She married, had children, and lived a quiet life in Philadelphia. But she never spoke about the war, never told her husband, never told her children the memories were too painful, and the government had made it clear her truth wasn't welcome. For 60 years, the story of Black women POWs in World War II remained hidden. When historians wrote about the war, they mentioned male POWs. When they wrote about women in the military, they focused on white nurses in WACS. When they wrote about Black Americans in World War II, they mentioned the Tuskegee Airmen and segregated combat units. But Black female POWs, they simply didn't exist in the historical record. It wasn't until the early 2000s, when surviving records were finally declassified, when a few historians started digging deeper, and when one of Delphine Carter's grandchildren opened that safe deposit box and found her testimony, that the truth began to emerge. And even then, even now, this story is barely known. There are no major movies, no documentaries on mainstream networks, no monuments. These women's names aren't taught in schools. Lieutenant Eula Aubrey died in 1989. She was 71 years old. The death certificate listed her occupation as retired nurse. It didn't mention her military service, didn't mention that she'd been a prisoner of war, didn't mention the lives she'd saved in a Nazi POW camp, or the courage she'd shown in the face of unimaginable cruelty. Her obituary in the local paper was 3 sentences long. Johnny Mae Welton passed away in 2004. Her funeral was attended by family and friends who'd known her as a quiet, dignified woman who sometimes seemed sad for reasons no one could quite understand. Only after her death, when her niece went through her belongings, did anyone find her military discharge papers, her POW identification card that the Army had finally issued decades too late, and her faded uniform still folded carefully in a trunk. Delphine Carter lived until 2012. She was 92 years old. In her final weeks, her granddaughter sat by her bedside and read aloud the testimony Delphine had written on those scraps of paper in Stalag 9A. The names of other Black women POWs, the dates, the acts of cruelty and unexpected kindness. Delphine listened, tears running down her weathered cheeks, and she whispered, "I just wanted someone to know, I wanted someone to remember that we were there." This is the story of Black POWs who weren't just men. Black women POWs who wore American uniforms, who served with honor, who endured Nazi captivity, and who came home to a country that told them to forget, to be quiet, and to disappear. Black female POWs who represented the absolute best of American courage and received in return the absolute worst of American injustice. Their names deserve to be known. Lieutenant Eula Aubrey, Private First Class Johnny Mae Welton, Delphine Carter, and the others, at least 8 more, whose names we're still trying to recover from classified records and fading memories. They were nurses and soldiers and Red Cross workers. They were daughters and sisters and dreamers. They were Black women who believed in freedom even when freedom didn't believe in them. And here's what we owe them. Not pity, not just anger at the injustice, though that anger is righteous. What we owe them is remembrance. We owe them the truth. We owe them the recognition they were denied in life. We owe them the simple acknowledgement that they existed, they served, they suffered, and they mattered. Because every time we tell a story about World War II without mentioning Black women POWs, we're continuing the erasure. Every time we talk about POWs and only mention men, we're perpetuating the silence. Every time we discuss the heroism of that generation without including these women, we're completing the work that the Army started in 1945 when they classified those records and ordered these women to forget. But they didn't forget. Even when they couldn't speak, they remembered. Even when history tried to erase them, they held on to their truth. And now finally we're beginning to remember too. We're beginning to tell their story. We're beginning to understand that the history of Black POWs includes women whose courage and resilience deserve to stand alongside any soldier, any prisoner, any hero we've ever honored. They survived the impossible. They endured the unendurable. They came home and carried their silence like a wound that never healed. And they did it all while being Black women in America, which meant they were fighting battles long before they ever faced a Nazi and long after they came home. This is their story. Hidden for too long, denied for too long, but never ever forgotten by the women who lived it. Because they were there, they wore the uniform, they bore the burden, and history owes them more than silence.